We need to talk about the Odyssey, because people are not only calling it the best Christopher Nolan film, but the best film ever made. And in this video, I'll tell you everything that happens in it, what it was really about, and what that shocking twist ending really means, because a lot of people are getting that one wrong. I'll answer questions you're left with, like how much of what we see and hear about was real? Did Odysseus really run into gods and monsters, or was something else going on? Because Christopher Nolan is really clever about how he plays with anything magical or supernatural in his films, and there is a crazy twist to this one that changes everything. I've got it all covered, and I'll give you my review and who I thought was the best actor in this film at the end. Quick update that Universal blocked this video the first time, so I have replaced all of the scenes that they claimed with my own interpretation created by me in MS Paint. Enjoy. If you're new here, I'm MadMorph, and this is my movie club. No AI is used in the writing of this script or the making of this video, so like and subscribe for more human-made content. And if you're interested in listening to the story of the Odyssey read to you by me for free, I have a podcast called Down to Sleep. I've just started reading the Odyssey over there, so go and check that out on Spotify and everywhere you get podcasts. You can find the link in the description or go to downtosleeppodcast.com. This is the Odyssey explained. Imagine you're a king summoned away to fight a war, and it has now been 20 years since you left. While you are traveling home trying to survive against cyclops, sirens, and witches, there are sleazy suitors feasting in your capital and trying to marry your queen. She is stalling as best as she can, but 20 years is a long time, and time is running out. So the son that you hardly know tries to set out to find you, the truth of what happened to you, or evidence of your death. The movie opens with a bard played by Travis Scott preparing to tell the tale of Odysseus' victory in Troy. Did you know that Christopher Nolan actually cast Travis Scott in this role because it's a nod to the fact that the original story of the Odyssey was told orally as poetry? It was handed down as spoken word, which he considered analogous to rap. So he's telling this story of Odysseus to everyone in the palace on the island of Ithica, which is Odysseus' home. We flash back immediately to the Trojan Horse on the beach, and SINON, played by Elliot Page, lets the warriors of Troy know that it's a gift. But the song and the story are interrupted by the queen Penelope, who says she doesn't want to hear it. While Odysseus' son Telemachus, played by Tom Spider-Man Holland, tells that he wants the bard to play the song to remind them all of whose wine they're drinking. Here's what you need to know about what's going on in Ithaca. All of these suitors are in the palace, including a man called Antinous, played by Robert Pattinson. They're here waiting for Queen Penelope to finally choose one of them to marry. While she stalls, they're feasting in the palace every night and eating her out of house and home because of Zeus's Law. Zeus's Law is central to this story, and it's a sacred law between host and guest that means a traveler could expect food, shelter, and comfort. A host must take care of them, and a guest must be respectful. It's a bit like the treat one as you would like to be treated rule, and they enforce it by saying anyone could be a god in disguise. Telemachus either wants to claim the throne or find his father, Antinous wants to marry Penelope, and Eumaeus is a blind servant who is loyal to Odysseus. Argus is Odysseus' hunting dog who he saved as a puppy, who is now 20 years old and is literally hanging on just to see his master again. We see Odysseus hunt, and one of the coolest things this character does is every time he uses his bow, he strings it and then plucks it loudly as it strikes this musical note. He says he does this to make it fair and to fight with honor. But this time, while Odysseus hunts, he has his ankle gored by a wild boar, and the wound is tended to by one of his servants. Eumaeus tells Telemachus the story of how when Agamemnon went to war with Troy, Odysseus raised his army by lottery. This was in the interest of fairness, and we see a young Sinon, the warrior from the beginning, draw the lot that lets them stay home. But when Antinous draws his lot and it says that he has to go to war, he whispers to Sinon and he swaps lots with them. It's a recurring thing throughout the movie, with Antinous claiming that he begged Odysseus to let him go to war with him, but he told him to stay behind. But this is not the truth. He is in fact a coward, and he promised Sinon to take care of his family if he swapped with him. Telling lies and telling stories to others and to yourself is at the core of this story, and I'll explain this fully at the end. For now, Queen Penelope explains to Telemachus that time is running out because people are scared of something called the people from the sea. And we see that Odysseus knew he would be gone for a very long time, and he tells Penelope that if he's not back by the time Telemachus is of age, to marry someone else. Odysseus has to go to war or Agamemnon will take his son, because he even sacrificed his own daughter to get favorable winds from the gods. Penelope calls that monstrous, while Odysseus says it's also committed. So Penelope suggests that they just run, take the fastest ship and head for the horizon, chasing the escaping sun. But Odysseus doesn't want to leave the people of Ithaca to face the consequences. So she gives him her pin and says, "Wear it always, so I'll know if someone has actually seen you or if they are lying to me." Telemachus wants to go to Sparta to speak to Menelaus and try to find out what happened to his dad, but Penelope warns him that if he leaves the palace, the suitors are going to try to kill him. And right after that, he gets into a fight with one of them trying to protect the dog Argus and Eumaeus. So Telemachus leaves in secret the next morning. He takes a man called Mentor with him and he heads out to find out about Odysseus. And now we finally, after all of that world building, join Odysseus in the present day. He walks in the desert and talks with Athena, played by Zendaya. He's older, he seems lost. His memories from the time of the war are coming back to him in dreams, but he doesn't really remember. Athena asks him, "Don't you want to remember?" But Calypso, who is a minor goddess played by Charlize Theron, a major goddess, is his companion in this desert and encourages him to stay. She is keeping Odysseus here and feeding him lotus flowers that make him forget. But now she tells him to stop eating them and tell her what he remembers. So he does. And we get the story from Odysseus as we flash back to the story of the war with Troy. Odysseus is standing over SINON's grave, the warrior from the beginning, and he holds the lottery stick that belonged to them, that brought them to this war. We see Odysseus tell his men they've spent 10 years on the beach and it's time to go home. Eurylochus, played by Himesh Patel, asks if they have enough provisions, to which Odysseus says, "We have taken enough from Troy. Another couple of stops won't kill us." Oh, how wrong he was. Once they set sail, he also changes course, saying that he's followed Agamemnon for long enough. While Agamemnon and his men row west, Odysseus raises his sails and lets the wind carry them south. And again, despite Eurylochus saying this is a risk, Odysseus says, "With a bit of luck, we'll see some of the world and still be back before Agamemnon." The reason he actually does this becomes much clearer later on. Fun fact, the dolphins that jump up out of the water in this scene were real, obviously, and unplanned. They were really out there on a boat filming, and they just happened to jump out of the water, and they got the shot. Quick side note, Himesh Patel, who plays Eurylochus, needs to be in more stuff. This guy started on a soap here in the UK called EastEnders. But he was also in a show called Station 11, which to me is one of the most underrated shows of all time that literally nobody saw. It's an amazing show and he's amazing in it. You should definitely check it out. And he's also going to be in the X-Files reboot as a co-lead, so he's definitely one to watch over the next few years. Back to the journey, because Odysseus and his crew are about to run out of rations when they see land, so he tells them to go ashore and get 3 weeks' worth of provisions. One soldier asks what if they won't give it, and Eurylochus tells him, "How badly do you want to go home?" Cut to this village, pillaged and on fire, and when a villager is asked, "Why didn't you just welcome us?" he says, "We thought you were the sea people." Eurylochus says, "No, we're the Greeks from Ithaca." As Odysseus tells Calypso, "No one could stand between my men and home, not even me." This is your first big clue that not only is Odysseus losing control, but that him and his men have been changed by their time at war. The next island they stop at, they follow a sheep into a cave hoping to find its flock, and they find big giant bags of cheese grommet on the wall. They start a fire and wait for the owner, looking to enact the law of Zeus and to trade with them. But as they do, the rest of the flock come in, followed by a giant cyclops who pulls a giant rock over the entrance of the cave, locking the men inside. Fun fact, this was all shot in an actual cave called Nestor's Cave in Greece, and a giant puppet was built to stand in for the Cyclops, with an actual actor then playing the part of the giant in the film. The Cyclops grabs and eats a couple of men from the darkness and then curls up by the fire and goes to sleep. They consider killing it, but Odysseus realizes just in time if they do that, they'll be stuck inside the cave forever. So they make a plan to just make a run for it when the Cyclops lets his flock out in the morning. But when they make a run for it in the morning, the Cyclops is like, "I spy with my giant eye you trying to escape," and he stomps on one and eats another one. And as he closes the rock back up, Odysseus runs back in to be with his men, and they make a new plan. The Cyclops is sleeping, and the men take a giant burning log, wake him up, and stab it into his eye as he roars and screams, blinded. If you thought Christopher Nolan's films were loud before, wait till you hear this thing in the cinema. The Cyclops, who is called Polyphemus, cries and talks out loud for the first time to his father Poseidon. Poseidon is the god of the sea, storms, earthquakes, and horses. Side note, this is one of the parts of the story and myths that always stayed with me from hearing about it as a child. I think it was something to do with that stabbing in the eye. It just kind of shocks you as a kid. I also played Poseidon in the school play when I was 8 or 9 years old. My only line was to step out onto the stage after this happened, with green tissue paper in my hair as seaweed, and shout, "What have they done to my son? I am Poseidon, and I will have my revenge." I was criminally underrated and underutilized in my youth, and some would say I still am. The men tie hay around them so they can trick the now blind Cyclops, who is feeling for his flock as they exit the cave. And they actually make it in one piece, but once they're outside of the cave, Polyphemus spits up half a helmet, and this angers Odysseus. He can't help it, and he fires an arrow back at the Cyclops that chases them all the way back down to their boat and kills 2 more men. Odysseus's men are annoyed at him for this, understandably, and they believe that he has angered Poseidon by harming his son, that the sea and the winds will be against them, and that Odysseus has been cursed. It's probably the dumbest thing that Odysseus does in the entire story, and it makes almost no sense for him to do it, so why did he? What you need to know is that in the book, Odysseus isn't perfect. He's actually pretty egotistical, and things go down with the Cyclops a little bit differently. They actually talk to the Cyclops in the book, with Odysseus tricking Polyphemus into believing that Odysseus's name is actually nobody. But once they escape, he can't resist but shout back that he's actually Odysseus to claim the glory of escaping the Cyclops. This allows Polyphemus to call out to Poseidon, his father, and curse Odysseus by his name. But in this adaptation, they don't talk to the Cyclops. That is all cut out, so Nolan's invention of replacing that mistake and that pride is with a stupid act of firing the arrow. It's also worth noting that Odysseus doesn't do his usual thing of stringing and plucking the bow to warn Polyphemus. He just fires it at him. Polyphemus is just a big one-eyed boy that was in a cave trying to enjoy some cheese and some sheep. He didn't ask them to come in there and blind him. But what it does show is that Odysseus has his flaws and that he's been changed by the war. This plays into a bigger theme and symbolism in the story, which is the erosion of civilization and Zeus's law. Meanwhile, in the present day, Telemachus is sitting with Menelaus, who is Agamemnon's brother. Played by the Walking Dead, let me tell you something, no, John Bernthal. He introduces himself saying he's the husband of Helen, who is sat next to him. That's Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships, but he quips, now maybe just 500, and reveals that half of her face is now scarred. The implication could be that this happened during the Battle of Troy, but my read on it is that Menelaus did it, as he seems quite proud to show it off. And he tells Telemachus the story of the Trojan Horse, but this time from inside the horse. Note how all of these tales are being told orally by one person to another, just like the original mythology and the stories were handed down. The story of the Trojan Horse is how the Greeks hid inside this horse statue, which was then given as a gift to Troy. They would take it inside their walls, which for 10 years they hadn't been able to get inside of, and then they snuck out and won the war. And all of this was Odysseus's idea. Christopher Nolan said that the shot of the horse half submerged on the beach is inspired by the Planet of the Apes, the Statue of Liberty in the sand. Once the soldiers take the horse inside the walls like a terrible one-night stand, one of them gives it a couple of quick pokes and then gives up. So Odysseus and his soldiers sneak out at night, wipe out the soldiers nearby, and make a run for the gate to open it from the inside. This lets their boss man, Agamemnon, aura farm his way inside like an ancient Darth Vader hallway scene as his men pour in and win the war. The story stops there for now as we cut back to Odysseus telling his tale to Calypso. He says that his men became convinced that he was cursed by Poseidon. We watch them land again looking for food as they head into the woods and find a creepy giant child who is as tall as them. Eurylochus even says, if that's a child, what about its parents? And then the child starts to scream like it's on a long-haul flight whilst you're trying to sleep, and the adults come out of the fog. The bad news is that they are man-eating giants, and they start slaying the men who run back to the ship whilst trying to fight them. In the book, they destroy 11 of Odysseus's 12 ships by throwing big rocks down from a cliff, with only Odysseus and his men escaping. In this tale, they destroy the other 2 ships that were with Odysseus, and only him and his men escape. And while the rest of his men are being killed, Odysseus sees Athena again and has flashbacks to seeing her in Troy. It's a pretty cool fight scene and escape scene. I can't tell if I hate or love the armor that these giants are wearing. It kind of looks like something out of a cheap TV production. It's a bit bland, but it's also kind of memorable for some weird reason. What do you think of their costume design? Let me know in a comment. The journey continues and they pull into land to find more food. They see the remains of ships buried in the sand. But shortly after they land, the men basically mutiny against Odysseus, saying that they think he should stay behind here. He is the one cursed by Poseidon and they need to ditch him to have any hope of getting home. Odysseus just says, "Give me your bow and I'll make sure that we eat tonight," and he goes off on his own. He chases a deer while the men head up a hill. The men head up to a stone ruin, and along the way they see lions and other big cats. The woman inside is terrified of them as Eurylochus promises, "We aren't going to hurt you, we just want food." So she gets them to put their weapons and their armor out the back, and when they do, they see piles of armor and weapons of men who have come before them. But somehow, perhaps blinded by their own greed, they don't clock what's going on, and we see them sitting down and stuffing their faces with a stew and meat. This is one of the most memorable scenes in the whole film and probably this whole year. It's disgusting. It's like a horror as they stuff their mouths faster than they can swallow. Meanwhile, Odysseus does his little twang routine whilst hunting the deer, and he finally hits it with an arrow, but it turns into a human. While at the same time, this woman in this ruin grabs Eurylochus' head and starts to squeeze and morph him into something else. This scene is pure body horror. Between the eating and the morphing of the men, and all of that transformation was done without CGI, which is why it looks so good and so disturbing. At one point, she stuffs her hand down their throat and just kind of squishes their heads like Play-Doh and turns them from men into pigs. This is Circe. In Greek mythology, she's a witch, and sometimes considered a goddess or a nymph. By the time Odysseus gets to the house, all of the men have been turned into swine. Circe tries to convince him to eat as well, but he rumbles her plan by noticing the men's rings are still here. He knows that they never left, and as Circe grabs his dagger, Odysseus grabs a crow in a cage, which is actually Circe's sister, to get her to back off. I think the most interesting thing here, aside from the amazing and creepy transformation, is Circe saying, "I didn't turn your men into anything." She implies that the pig is their true form, or more accurately, the swine, that they've pillaged across the world for him and that he sent them to her, hungry and hot-blooded soldiers. Odysseus asks, "Did they hurt you?" and she says, "They would have." And considering that Circe actually has gifts, you would think that she is right. She turns them back into men, but what's really cool is she repeats, "Come back into your disguises," implying that the men are actually savage swine and that being a human is the disguise. It's a cool touch, and it's actually quite important for what comes later. A difference here from the book is that in the book it's Eurylochus who suspects her and does not go into the home and then warns Odysseus and others back at the ship. And Odysseus actually lives with her on this island for a year and even has children with her, but this is changed in Nolan's adaptation. Before Odysseus leaves, Circe tells him that he next has to go to Hell, to Hades, to speak to Tiresias, adding on that the gods say that only Odysseus will make it home. But Odysseus seems intent on defying the gods. They head to Hades, which was shot in Iceland on location. It's the go-to place anytime someone wants an otherworldly location, and it works every time. Having been there in real life, it is truly one of the most otherworldly places you can go to in the world. Even looking out the plane window as you land, you feel like you're landing on another planet. And it is the perfect setting for Hades in this film. Christopher Nolan's location scouting team, whoever you are, you've done it again. There in Hades, Odysseus speaks to Tiresias, a blind prophet who can see the future, played by James Remar, aka Dexter's dad. And one by one, the dead come forward to speak to Odysseus. First is SINON, the warrior from the beginning, and there is a flashback to a conversation that Odysseus and him have on the beach at Troy. This simple scene is one of the most important to the whole story, but most people miss what's really going on. Odysseus asks SINON why they volunteered to be the one to deliver the Trojan Horse. SINON says, "Don't you remember how I came here? I begged to take Antinous' place." And Odysseus has to correct him and say, "He offered money for your family if you took his place." In this adaptation, the Odyssey is at its heart a spoken word story, characters telling other characters a tale. But it's not just about the exaggerations and the lies that become myths that we tell to others. It's about the ones that we tell to ourselves, so often that we start to believe them. There is a really genius reason why Nolan did it like this, and I'll explain that properly at the end. For now, Sinon tells Odysseus that his father died in poverty, revealing that Antinous cheated him and never actually paid his family. He tells Odysseus that once he's home he must head into the west to give sacrifice for the men that they failed to bury, and requests that Odysseus gives the lottery stick, the shame, back to Antinous. The spirit of Agamemnon speaks next, revealing that he was welcomed home by his wife, but then she murdered him that very night for sacrificing their child. He warns Odysseus to not walk in the front door expecting garlands and praise, but to be cautious and to assess. Tiresias can see the future, and he warns Odysseus of the sirens. He also warns him that when he comes to a whirlpool, if he tries to sail through it, they will all die. And that the other direction leads to SCYLLA, where only 6 of his men will die. And Tiresias is just dropping prophecies like a Luke goblin being spanked, because he also tells Odysseus that when his men eat the sun god Apollo's cattle, they'll be killed by Zeus. To which Odysseus says, I can still save them from the gods. And Tiresias says, but not from themselves, as the spirits of the unburied men show up and chase them all back to their ship. Back in the present, Odysseus starts to wonder where his crew is and if Calypso did something to them. To which Calypso is like, shut up and eat some more lotus flowers and go to sleep. Tomorrow you'll remember everything. Back in Ithaca, Antinous makes his play for Penelope. He repeats the lie that he tried to go with Odysseus as a boy and was told to stay behind. And Penelope's serving girl, played by Mia Goth, is a traitor, and she tells Antinous that Telemachus has gone to sea, so the suitors plan to go after him and kill him. Back on Calypso's shore, she's trying to convince Odysseus to remember, and he's saying, I don't need to know the truth, I'm happy here with you. But his actions say otherwise, as he's gathering parts of his old ship and making a raft. So he acquiesces and he tells the story of the sirens to Calypso. In mythology, the sirens are hybrid birdwomen who live on a rock in the sea, and they use their voices to lure passing sailors to their death. It's a bit like me luring you to sleep on my podcast Down to Sleep, which is on Spotify and everywhere you get podcasts for free. But in this instance, because Odysseus was warned by Circe, he has his men tie him to the ship's mast so he can listen to the song. The men plug their ears with wax so they can't hear it. Eurylochus is like, this is a bad idea, nobody hears this and lives. And Odysseus says, that's why it's a good idea, I'll be the first. This is another nod to that hubris of Odysseus. He's very prideful and arrogant and forever putting himself and his men in danger as a result. And they sail past the sirens with Odysseus screaming the whole time and crying. If there is going to be any conversation about Matt Damon being nominated for awards for this film, this is probably the scene they will focus on. I'll talk more about all of the acting at the end, but I could see him getting nominated for this one because the film is so huge. Do I think he should win? No, but if he does, it'll be for this scene because it's the only time he really goes big with his performance. We as the audience don't hear the song. The sound drops out when the men fill their ears with wax. It's all on Matt Damon to sell you this idea with his acting that he is hearing something so profound. And honestly, everything about this scene is pretty much perfect. It is a highlight of the entire film. There's a quiet soundtrack, there's the beautiful cinematography as we peer through the fog and try to see what's on the rocks, while Odysseus recounts to Eurylochus what the siren's song is like. He says, it's all the things you want it to be. Then it's all the things you never wished for. The delicious itch that you go to scratch and find that it's under your skin and you can't reach it. So the delicious itch becomes unbearable. That the song told you what you most want is what you most can't have, and what you most can't have is what you already had and lost. It was the song of all the promises that you failed to keep, and it told me that I don't really want to go home. It is probably the best bit of writing and directing that Nolan does for this entire film, as one of the sailors, unable to resist pulling the wax from his ears, dives overboard to swim out to them. It is perfectly shot as you see only the tiniest of glimpses of what might be something on the rocks. You think you see something and then it's gone. It's a scene that has you leaning forward in your seat, but not too much because you're also a little bit scared, but you're craning your neck trying to see what is out there on those rocks beyond the fog. But you can't. The soundtrack, the sound design, the writing, the directing, the cinematography all put you in the shoes of the sailors on that ship. It essentially mimics the effect of the siren song because you find yourself as a viewer reaching for it and wanting to hear it, and you can't. Things quickly go from bad to worse for the men as they now approach the monstrous whirlpool that Odysseus was warned about, but the men don't know. He tries to convince them to sail for the whirlpool and to steer out of it, but they don't listen to him and opt to sail through the strait. Remember, Odysseus was warned, if you go into the whirlpool, you will all die. If you go the other way, Scylla is waiting and only 6 of you will die. The question is, was Odysseus really hoping that they could outsail this giant whirlpool? Or was this brilliant reverse psychology knowing if he suggested the whirlpool that his men would no longer listen to him and go the other way, saving the majority of them even though none of them care for him anymore? They sail into the narrow channel where Scylla, a sea monster with 6 long necks and 12 tentacles, waits and feeds on 6 of them. They are plucked from the ship, and the design for Scylla is pretty interesting but a lot less horrifying than it could have been. It might also be that this is where it's clearly a lot of CGI for this monster, but it's like an elephant's trunk that plucks the men up off of the boat and then retreats into a hole in the cliff. I love monsters, especially love sea monsters, and this could have been way cooler. It's maybe one of the only things where I'm like, that could have been so much better. It's also over really, really quickly, which is a shame. Eurylochus realizes that Odysseus knew about this and didn't tell them, and there we have our answer. Odysseus says, if I told you, you would have sailed into the whirlpool and killed us all. And these events just keep happening at a breakneck pace now, as they now approach the sun god's isle. And Odysseus tells them straight out, do not land there. Tiresias told me that if you eat the cattle on that island, you are all going to die. But the ship is all banged up by the attack from Scylla, and they swear not to touch the cattle, and they land. But then the wind changes, and it keeps them there on the island until they run out of food and start to starve. Which leads to one night Odysseus waking up and being led by Athena to find his men cooking and eating the cattle in a hole in the ground. And Odysseus just looks like a disappointed dad that has just walked in on their kid doing something unholy in his bedroom, and he just says, did you think if you ate quietly that the sun god wouldn't notice? And he walks away, as Athena tries to reason with him to see that the men's deaths are not on his shoulders. That these men dying is their failure, not Odysseus's, but he says, I led them here. And Athena asks him, why don't you want to go home? It's a recurring and important theme that Odysseus is the one that is avoiding going home. This is not a story about a guy trying to get back to his wife and his son and just facing all of these terrible things happening to him. He actively welcomes these distractions. The wind finally changes, so the men get in the boat and try to leave, but are hit immediately with a crazy storm that tears the boat apart. Eurylochus begs Odysseus, pray to Poseidon, pray for forgiveness, but he doesn't. Even in this moment where his men are clinging on for their life, Odysseus is too proud to pray to Poseidon for forgiveness for what he did to Polyphemus. Even now he must defy the gods. The boat is torn in half, with all of Odysseus's crew on one side of it and Odysseus on his own on the other. And we never see the crew again. The implication is that they all died, while Odysseus washed up on Calypso's shore. This is where he's been for the last 7 years, eating lotus flowers that make him forget. Calypso has fallen in love with him. In the book, Calypso keeps him there against his will. She offers him immortality and eternal youth to stay. But Odysseus just cries and pines for Penelope and spends 7 years wanting to go home. And Calypso only lets him go because Athena literally sends Hermes to tell her to do so. In this adaptation, she's a little bit more redeemable, a little bit softer, a bit of a lover girl, and the gods are less involved. Calypso just loves him and says that she knew he wasn't ready to go home yet. He says, I am now, so she gives him the pin of Penelope's, and this jogs his memory, and she tells him to give himself to Poseidon and to go home. Odysseus straps himself to his raft and he floats out into the sea where he is swallowed by the waves. While he experiences flashbacks to Troy, which represent him facing his trauma and guilt, before finally washing up on the shores of his home, Ithica, with Athena sat waiting. Odysseus goes to Emmaus, the blind servant, who's been attacked by the suitors, but he's pretending not to be Odysseus. Just like in the books, he pretends to be a beggar. Remember how Agamemnon told him, don't expect garlands and a cess. This is what he's doing. His servant tells him Telemachus has gone to Pylos and that the suitors are going there to try to kill him. So even though he just got home, Odysseus sails out to try to save his son. Telemachus is going to the temple of Athena, where the suitors are pretending to be priests. They kill Mentor with poison, and luckily Odysseus is there to save his son, and he goes all John Wick and kills all of the suitors that are in that temple. And him and his son set fire to the temple and go home. Odysseus is pretending that he's Sinon, and he says that he served Odysseus, who is still alive, but Telemachus can't tell anyone. Odysseus tells Telemachus to tell Penelope to remarry so that all of the suitors will be in the palace. So Telemachus says he's heard nothing of Odysseus, only tales of the people of the sea who are violating Zeus's law, and that there is a fear of them causing the collapse of civilization. He says the plan is for Penelope to choose someone to marry, and when she does, Telemachus will only have to deal with one suitor, not a palace full. Penelope reminds Telemachus that she's been sitting on the throne for 20 years. It hasn't been empty, but because this boy's got bristles on his chin, it means nothing. Odysseus comes to the palace, and outside he finds his dog Argus laying on a dung pile. He was put there by Antinous, who said he will have to stay there from now on. Odysseus is reunited with the dog that he saved and then raised from a puppy. And Argus, who has only been staying alive and holding on to see his master again, wags his tail, whines, and dies as his master strokes him. This reveals to Telemachus that the beggar is actually Odysseus, his father. It is the saddest scene in the whole film, and it had me quietly ugly crying, as I'm sure it did anyone who has ever lost a pet family member. However you lost them, it just never leaves you, and I feel like this scene just captured it. Telemachus realizes that Daddy's home, and Odysseus is like, nope, I'm just a beggar. But when that Odysseus finally meets you, he's going to be really proud, wink wink. They head into the palace, and Odysseus hands Antinous the lot from Sinon, his shame. Antinous throws a chair at this beggar, which is really Odysseus, breaking Zeus's law, so the feast is over and the suitors are sent away for the night. And Queen Penelope talks to Odysseus through her screen while she has a servant wash his feet. The servant is the same one from earlier, and she notices the scar on his ankle. He motions for her to keep it a secret, and she does. This conversation between Penelope and Odysseus, who she thinks is a beggar, is really important. She says, how come you made it home and he didn't? The Odysseus that I knew would have found and fought his way back to me no matter what. Odysseus says, what if the Odysseus that you knew lost his way? What if one night in a strange city he saw things that made him think that the home that he knew couldn't possibly be there anymore? And he looks to his side and Athena is sat with him. He tells the story of Troy from his side, where earlier it was recounted as a brave victory by Menelaus. To Odysseus it looked like 10 years of men's rage that poured into a city after he opened the gate. He watches innocent people being assaulted and worse and slaughtered as the city is burned. It is a rampage all around him as he walks through a burning Troy whilst following behind Agamemnon. This links back to his refusal to continue following Agamemnon home after this happened. While he follows him here, he sees terrible things that traumatize him forever. He says that they gave them a gift and violated all that was sacred between people. The Trojan Horse was Odysseus's idea and it violated Zeus's law. Odysseus says, we turned a fight into a hunt. And in his flashback, we see a young woman played by Zendaya executed by his soldiers at the exact same moment that they cut off the head of a statue of Athena. This is the twist that reveals why she has been appearing as this woman to him all through the journey since that day. Is it really the goddess Athena, or is it his guilt and his trauma from what happened that night? I'll explain it at the end. For now, Odysseus likens the burning of Troy to the burning of the world. He knew exactly what he had done in that moment, and he holds himself responsible for coming up with the plan that completely broke Zeus's law. Penelope asks him, you are the people from the sea? And he says, yes, my queen. The breaking of Zeus's law is spreading like a plague. Another twist that the threat of the sea people has been the Greeks the entire time, and to an extent Odysseus and his men, that it was all of those men who were returning home from Troy, pillaging and committing crimes along the way whilst getting provisions from the people on the route. That social contract of Zeus's law of hospitality and respect had been broken, and these men, after 10 years away and fighting this war, did whatever they wanted to the people that they came into contact with. He tells Penelope Odysseus is alive, and he'll be here when you need him the most. Penelope says, I've been living in his ruin long enough, and she stands up and says that she's going to set a challenge, and whoever completes it, she will marry them. So the weapons in the palace are hidden in a back room by the servants, and the trial is set up, with the suitors and everyone else locked inside. The challenge is to string Odysseus's bow and shoot the arrow through a line of axes, the same thing that he used to do to show off and that nobody else could do. The suitors one by one try to string the bow and aren't strong enough. Antinous refuses to even try, saying, you've proven your point, we can't replace him, just choose the best one of us. And the beggar, Odysseus, wants to have a go, whilst everyone laughs and mocks him. There is some really beautiful acting in this scene from Anne Hathaway, as the tragic hopes is written all over her face that this could be her husband finally come home. But it's been 20 years, and old Odysseus struggles at first with the bow, so she turns away. And then he succeeds. He strings it, and he plucks the bow loudly like he does when he's hunting. It's an all-timer cinematic moment as that note rings out in time with the musical score and gives absolutely everyone watching chills. This is the moment that he reveals himself to be Odysseus, with Penelope realizing and turning, while Antinous knows immediately who it is and runs to hide. And Odysseus shoots the arrow through the line of axes and then turns his bow onto the suitors and starts to murder them. Him plucking that bow wasn't just aura farming, it was him telling everyone in that room, I'm about to hunt you. It's a really lengthy fight scene though, as Odysseus deals with all of the suitors while a treacherous servant starts dropping them weapons from the ceiling, the whole time a cowardly snivelling Antinous hiding behind a pillar and shouting orders. The fight felt a little bit like a video game where it's guys with nothing, then it's guys with swords, then they have shields, now they have spears. It kind of just kept going. Telemachus wants to help his dad, but Odysseus says no, he doesn't want him involved because he knows if he is, he will also have to face the consequences. So Telemachus does what he is allowed to do, which is kill his servant who was dropping down the weapons to the suitors. He can't touch the suitors because they're guests, but he can kill that servant. And he drops his father a sword and shouts, Dad! And that allows him to wipe out the rest of them. He shoves Sinon's lot into Antinous' mouth and kills him. And anyone else in there that wants to stay alive surrenders and bows to their king. Odysseus is wounded and returns the pin to his queen and collapses, and Penelope says, you came back. He says yes to see my beloved Ithica one last time. Penelope says, you can't die now, and he says, not death, exile. Telemachus will be king, and they will head west to honor his men. They'll do exactly what she said earlier, take the fastest ship and the greatest crew and head for the horizon, chasing the escaping sun. This shows that Penelope never wanted the throne, she only wanted Odysseus. They leave together as she asks him, why will the stories only be sung? And he says, because songs will be all they have to remember those of us who could write. She says that civilization will rise again. Odysseus says, a new dawn will break over the darkened world, and our mistakes will once again be forgotten. As we see a flashback of Odysseus watching the Trojan Horse burning, and the movie ends. But what does it all mean? Why did they actually leave, and how much of this was actually real? I don't mean in actual history, but even in the world of the story. Did Odysseus really meet gods and monsters and be cursed by Poseidon? Was Athena real and actually guiding him, or was there something else going on? There are some really clever twists and writing to this tale, so let's go through it. This is the ending explained. But first, if you're new here, now is a great time to hit that subscribe button. I'm MadMorph, this is my movie club. It's like a book club but for movies, so after you subscribe, make sure you drop into the comments and let everyone else know what you thought of this film. Why does Odysseus leave in exile? Odysseus knew that killing the suitors would result in him being forced into exile. This is why he stops Telemachus from intervening or harming the guests during the fight. His plan was to wipe them out, to be exiled, and leave Ithaca for his son to be king. He never really wanted to come home, so this homecoming is just a cleanup mission to save his son and leave with his queen, just like she tried to get him to do 20 years ago. What's important here is that his beggar disguise is another trick. It's his own Trojan horse and yet another violation of Zeus's law. But this time Odysseus is able to feel that he's doing it to do what needs to be done, to save his family, to save Ithaca. And I think this symbolic repeating and facing of his own greatest shame and trauma allows him to process the guilt and the consequences of what he did with the Trojan horse. That massive violation of Zeus's law is the reason that he hasn't come home for 10 years and the source of all of his guilt and anguish. So it makes sense that when he does finally return home, he has to face it. The same way he makes Antinous face his greatest shame and quite literally forces the lied about lot into his throat as he kills him. This grand epic adventure is actually about trauma, shame, and guilt. How is the ending of the Odyssey different to the book? In the movie, Odysseus gets a happy ending. A brief homecoming, a reunion with Penelope and Telemachus, and then him and his queen sail off into the sunset, heading west to do right by his men and then just sail off into the horizon together. In the book, Odysseus finds himself in big trouble for what he did in the palace. The families of the men want revenge. There is about to be a battle when Zeus throws a thunderbolt in and Athena appears and makes them all swear to a truce. It's literally a divine intervention by the gods to end the fight and save his life, leaving Odysseus to go on one final quest to lift the curse placed on him by Poseidon. He has to carry an oar and take it on a journey until he finds men who don't recognize what it is, men who know nothing of the sea. There he must make a sacrifice to Poseidon, which is in itself very cool, but there is a key reason why Christopher Nolan made the changes that he did, especially to the ending. And that is because he is very cleverly leaving how much the gods are involved in this story totally up to you. So how much of the Odyssey was actually supernatural and how much were the gods involved? Were they really even there? Christopher Nolan famously likes to keep his stories grounded, and if he does dabble in magical mythology, it's given a pretty firm grounding in possible science, like Tesla in The Prestige or the physics of Interstellar. The same way that we ended up with the world of Batman being reimagined as a dark, gritty crime noir trilogy that could have taken place in the real world. So when Christopher Nolan adapts the Odyssey, a mythological epic full of gods and monsters and magic, the question that everybody had was, how is he going to handle that side of it? And that's the twist at the heart of this entire story. The ending reveal of Athena is a twist that changes everything. The idea that the girl from Troy who was killed by his men in front of him is the one haunting him that he perceives to be Athena. It turns this entire story and the world that we think it is set in on its head. Was Athena real, or was Odysseus just seeing the young woman from Troy? We are left with the question, has he really been talking to a god this entire time, or is he just haunted by the trauma of that night? At the same time as the men kill the girl, the statue of Athena has its head knocked off by soldiers. These two acts become synonymous in the mind and heart of Odysseus. He is not simply haunted by the death of one girl, she is a symbol of the terrible events that took place that night. She is every innocent that he saw killed. She represents what Odysseus saw in the men and what they did, and the head of the statue represents the destruction of Zeus's law, the dismantling and the ruining of the sacred. Both things tangled and intertwined and all mixed up and appearing as Athena. Odysseus believes his Trojan horse idea is responsible for what happened in Troy and for the fall of civilization as a whole, the end of the Bronze Age. That from that moment on, those men and those acts of violence would spread like a plague and end an era of hospitality and peace. When he says that the stories will be sung because it will be the only way they have to remember those of us who can write, he is saying that the people who can write, the civilized world, is ending. That what remains and comes after won't be civilized enough to even write these stories down. That night was the moment that Odysseus saw that the world that they lived in was ending, that civilization was crumbling, and it broke him. The final shot of Odysseus in Troy looking at the Trojan horse burning and it falls into a building, a symbol of civilization. That is the moment he realized, and it's why he never came home. But how much of the Odyssey was real and how much was just a story? Remember that all of these are tales. The flashbacks are being told by one character in the story to another. The bard at the beginning, Penelope, recounts how her husband would string the bow. Eumaeus tells the story of Odysseus hunting and preparing for war. Odysseus's side is him telling Calypso of the journey with his men, all of whom are dead, so no one can say whether it was true or not. Menelaus tells Telemachus of the Trojan Horse, and so on and so forth. This is not just a nod to the traditional way that this story was told, orally as spoken word and not written down, but it also allows for the story to be exaggerated, to be a myth, to involve gods and monsters from the person who is telling it. Did those things really happen? Did they fight a cyclops and man-eating giants and sea monsters? Did gods really curse them as the characters tell them to us? Or are they a story, a myth being retold by an old, traumatized and guilt-ridden veteran? Men who want to inflate and exaggerate some deeds while manifesting excuses for others. This is purposely and intentionally ambiguous by Nolan. He purposely cut stories and characters from the Odyssey that point directly to the gods' involvement. A character like Hermes doesn't appear at all. On Circe's island, it is Hermes who shows up and tells Odysseus a message from Athena, how to defeat Circe. It is Hermes who shows up on behalf of Athena to tell Calypso to let Odysseus go. And of course, the biggest change, the ending, completely removing Zeus and Athena's involvement. Why? Because it's so important to the story and that ambiguity that Odysseus is the only one who ever sees Athena. If we had Hermes showing up saying, "I've got a message from Athena," it would prove that the gods were real. If you watch this thinking that the gods and the monsters were real, when you rewatch it, keep that in mind. Maybe Athena isn't, and you will see it from a different angle. By Christopher Nolan cutting and changing elements of the story and focusing on the flashbacks being a orally told story, it allows for this really plausible bending of the truth in these times while still grounding the world in reality. So it's open to your interpretation. Was Odysseus a broken veteran who is so weighed down with guilt that he doesn't return home for 10 years? And that all of his tales and adventures are actually embellishments and lies? Or as the magical and mythological Odyssey that is full of gods and monsters? It is up to you. All of Odysseus's men are dead. No one else can corroborate. The narrators are shown to be biased and often untrustworthy. Remember how Antinous said he wanted to go with Odysseus to war but was told to stay. But really, we see him take SINON's lottery place. That could be put down to just him being a villainous liar. But don't forget that SINON also lied to Odysseus and to himself. He remembers it as him begging to go to take Antinous's place, but Odysseus has to correct him. And from this comes the biggest hint that all of this might just be made up. When SINON gives Odysseus the lottery stick and says, "If I don't make this home, take it to my father and tell him everything I did," he then calls Odysseus back and adds, "Feel free to add some stuff." On your first watch, this might feel like a throwaway, light-hearted line, but I don't think anything is throwaway in this writing. And it's actually key to the entire story. Feel free to add some stuff. It's letting the audience know that the stories being told have been added to, have been embellished. That is the genius of the twist and how Nolan has written this adaptation. Did Circe really turn his crew into pigs, or is that a symbol for the way that they pillaged and murdered their way across the sea like swine? Was the magical interpretation an easier pill to swallow for Odysseus's mind? Was there really a one-eyed cyclops with sheep in a cave, or did Odysseus and his men blind a shepherd and steal his flock to eat? Was there a cannibal tribe of giants in the woods, or did his men at some point turn to cannibalism to survive and make up stories to forgive themselves? The same way we're shown time and time again that Antinous made up his version of his life to forgive himself. We are openly reminded again and again that people lie even when they don't mean to. There is a double meaning and a double reading possible of every story that we're told. Just as the sea people are an embellishment in a well-travelled story that is revealed to be Odysseus and his other men travelling home. But what do you think? Was this really a story of monsters and magic, and in this movie's world did that stuff happen? Or was it just stories? Odysseus is not a perfect person. In the book, he's prideful and egotistical, and this is what leads to a lot of problems and danger for him and his men. In the film, this is a bit more subtle. Odysseus lets the lottery swap happen. He keeps the truth from SINON about the Trojan Horse. When asked by Eurylochus if they have enough provisions, he says we've taken enough from Troy. The poor decisions that he makes in this adaptation aren't just driven by pride and hubris, but by him being a broken, guilty man, refusing to follow Agamemnon home to go their own way, saying, "I've followed him for long enough." He has been changed by the war and the things that happened and that he saw in Troy, and he no longer wants to be associated with it. But he puts himself and all of his men at risk to do so. Odysseus himself says that the Siren's song told him that he didn't really want to go home. Is that what's really going on here? While Penelope is stalling with suitors, Odysseus is out there stalling returning home. The veteran that is so scarred by the things that he's done and seen that he can't face a homecoming. Like so many veterans in real life, when he does finally come home, he finds that yes, home has changed. But he is the one that has changed that much more, and that he no longer fits in, so he leaves. I think that might be what this adaptation is really about. My review of the Odyssey is that I love this film, but I have some thoughts and I think people aren't going to be happy with me. First of all, I think it's brilliantly made. We're very lucky to have a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan doing these big movies practically. Where he shines through on most of his films is in those big set pieces, the locations, and things having this grand epic scale. Personally, I really love his earlier work that was a bit more low-key and focused on mystery and story. He's really good at that too. People sometimes forget that this guy is a master at a thrilling mystery, and it's not just all about these big films. I love his movies. Let me say that again before we go into the next bit. I love Christopher Nolan films. But where he doesn't always get it perfect for me is in his fight scenes, some of his writing, and his casting. And no, this has nothing to do with the diversity and all of that other nonsense and noise that people tried to create around this movie. That is just stupid. I just think he has a habit of casting quite bland actors that might be a little bit too famous for what he's doing. He has his favourites and he sticks by them while scattering in some odd choices and some interesting ones. I would love to see what a Christopher Nolan movie looks like with just really unknown but strong actors in. Tom Holland and Matt Damon aren't actors that disappear into the role. I can still see Matt Damon and Tom Holland. I like Matt Damon and I like Tom Holland, but that's just not what they do. Anne Hathaway and Robert Pattinson are for me the strongest actors in this film. And there are some really good actors in this. Mia Goth, to me, seemed miscast and wasted as Melantho. Agamemnon is awesome until Benny Safdie starts talking. Lupita Nyong'o did great with a small amount of time, and Charlize Theron is stunning and talented, but forgettable as Calypso. That one I think is down to the writing. Himesh Patel, Elliot Page, John Leguizamo were all really good in their roles and believable. James Remar as Tiresias in Hades was one of the most memorable performances out of the whole thing. In like 3 minutes of screen time, it was brilliant. Samantha Morton as Circe was fine. I don't think it was as incredible as some are saying. She's great and the character is interesting, but I think people are mixing up their emotions about how good that scene is in general with her performance. She didn't really have a lot to do. But something like that shines when Matt Damon is pretty bland if he's not strapped to a mast and screaming. The central performances went to maybe 2 of the most boring actors in Hollywood. And listen, again, I like Matt Damon. I like Tom Holland. But if you are making a list of people who can carry a movie that you want to stand on its own for the rest of time, they don't make that list. Harsh, but true. Zendaya as Athena did fine. It's another one I'm going to put down to the writing, because the role called for this dual role of goddess and ghost. She can't give you full Athena if she's going to be revealed to be a girl that was killed in Troy at the end. She is, however, a fantastic actress. I have a video on here of the drama, and she is brilliant in that. And here is my other issue, even though I love them, with Christopher Nolan films. The third act is always really rushed, and so is the ending. When it comes to the actual story and the journey of Odysseus, we're quickly jumping from one set piece to another. I would have loved to have seen him take a little bit more time with each one. The most time we spend is with the cyclops in the cave. The others are really quick scenes in what is an almost 3-hour movie. It reminds me of The Dark Knight, how that is an almost perfect film, but as soon as it gets to that final set piece with the boats and the detonators, I'm like, oh god, I remember this third act kind of stinks. That happens to a lesser extent here. The plucked string is an all-time cinematic moment, but followed by a slightly too long and boring fight and a quick ending wrap-up. Having said all that, I'm not a hater. I love this movie. It's an 8 or a 9 out of 10. The rest of it is amazing and some of the best stuff that you will see in a cinema for many years. But that's just me giving my opinion of the things that stop it from being perfect and from being one of the best movies ever. And I get it, the Matt Damon and the Tom Holland thing, as much as I like them, but not being able to disconnect and immerse completely is probably a me thing. I was moved multiple times to tears whilst watching this film twice, and I'll definitely watch it again. It is a film that is worth watching, it's worth your time, and there will be people who love this and watch it probably once a year for many years to come. And as amazing as the Odyssey is, I have to say I do think that The Prestige and Interstellar are still better. Having said that, the Odyssey and Christopher Nolan are good for film and are good for cinema. But what did you think of the Odyssey? Who gave the best performance and what is the best Christopher Nolan film? Let everyone know in a comment because this is a movie club, like a book club but for movies, so be sure to jump down there into the comments and subscribe to join the club. I've been MadMorph and this has been the Odyssey Explained. If you'd like to listen to me read the Odyssey to you as a free audiobook, check out Down to Sleep on Spotify and everywhere you get podcasts. You can find the links to that and everything that I do, including my gaming channel, in the description or by going to madmorph.com. Until next time, check out the rest of the channel, click one of those videos on the screen for another movie explained with me, and I will see you the next time something amazing comes out. Until then, thank you and good night.